is it even like all of the things that you have to manually do, are they even worth doing? Is there even any merit
Mm,
in doing them? Are you just suffering because we, the rest of society, we can't live without these things like politeness, and we have to walk on eggshells and make each
yeah.
other feel good? Or is it worth? I feel like with you there is these two things at so on one hand you're against like political correctness and politeness and all of these things, and you're saying that it's just logical and it's all just true what you're
Mm,
saying, but on the other hand
yeah.
you're clearly saying that there is that this is a disability. So
Yeah. Well, the thing is, yeah, but like having those social norms and stuff, that's against my interest in a way because like I'm not naturally able to conform to it in the same way everyone else is. And so, there's like, I'm sort of in a way like I'm against it in the sense that like, applying political correctness standards to me all the time in a way is like disability discrimination because like because of my, neurodevelopmental disorder. Like I'm literally unable to
mhm,
conform to that,
mhm,
at least automatically in the same way everyone else is,
mhm.
and so, I guess that's one of the ways, that meme, "Please be patient, I have autism," kinda comes from that, It's like a because, yeah, like, I'm not gonna get things right all the time, because I can't pick up what everyone else picks up, you
But
know?
is what you're not able to pick up, is that even something worth picking up in your
Well,
opinion?
I mean, when it I suppose, like, I attribute, that kind of not being able to pick up stuff to, like dissatisfaction in my quality of life. I kind of feel like if I didn't have, these social deficits, maybe, I would have had more friends throughout my life. I would have, you know,
Oh,
been
uh,
able to,
I'm sorry. I think I'm not making myself clear. Because what I mean is, if everyone would be like you, right?
mm,
If
yeah,
everyone would be like you, would we
mhm.
have? Are we would we miss out on something, or would it be a better world basically? If I'm guessing like a world without politeness, where everybody is like you, where
Mm,
everybody is straightforward and just saying what they think, and is
yeah,
not able to. Yeah, do you think that there will be a better world basically overall if you could just yeah
yeah.
make that world?
I mean, that's a controversial question, I suppose, but yeah, I mean, like, I think it would be better for me because then I would like be on a level playing field with everyone else.
Sure, but
But I think it maybe in terms of like, I do see how like, neurotypical society is sort of like screwing itself over in a way, with things like political correctness and just denial of logic and just kind of sort of like, like you see politicians sort of, it's, no specific politician, there's loads of them, just sort of using people's feelings and stuff to get them to vote certain ways and things like that. Yeah, I mean, I do it, when I see stuff like that, I do think, like maybe if people could just see through this bullshit and like look at the facts and figures and be objective about things and be more logical, then yeah, maybe things would be better. Maybe we wouldn't have 21st century technology yet. You've still got people in developed countries going to food banks and, the trains still don't run on time and shit like that. Like, yeah, I think in theory, like there are lots of virtues to, the black and white autistic way of thinking. In terms of like if everyone thought that way, like I don't know, because I don't like I'm not one of these people who just like you know, despises neurotypicals or anything. I do see there are some, there's definitely some virtue in it, or at least, some admiration I have for people who can have this, this automatic sense that I don't have. And yeah, maybe there are things that they can they're more capable of, and in a sense there is some sort of, yeah, well, I do have some admiration for that. But I think the main thing, that I would like is just to have a bit more understanding and tolerance of, autists, kind of
If you
like
would,
people who can't get that.
if you would, I mean, there is a lot of. I'm guessing the real question behind it is, are all there is a lot of comorbidities basically with autism,
Yeah, right.
and depression, anxiety, and many more. And
Mm,
basically, the question is that something that comes from is a side effect of autism directly, or is it related to the way society is basically dealing with people with
mm,
autism and basically reacting to people with autism or autistic people.
right.
And
Yeah.
I mean, like, can you imagine a planet? Imagine a second planet next to
Mm,
this planet, and on
yeah.
one planet there is just autistic people, and on the other there is just neurotypical people. Uh,
Mm,
which planet would you think would have a higher score on happiness and maybe also technological advantage?
mm,
Uh, just it's a stupid hypothetical, but just to get a grasp of how much do you actually feel like there is a deficit in being autistic.
mm.
If it's just coming from society, if the deficit's only there because society is neurotypical and you're the only one, or you are in the minority, or do you think that it's actually in being autistic there is a deficit?
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, like autism is like generally accepted now to be mostly genetic, right? But I do feel like, yeah, the environmental sort of factors do play a huge role. And I have actually talked about quite a bit about like how, in under some sort of like, environments, like autism is an adaptive trait, when it's like things like budgeting or, like looking for certain resources is more important than like, you know, social cooperation, in like maybe some, comparing like certain hunter-gatherer societies to certain agricultural societies and stuff historically, like there are potentially evolutionary advantages to prioritizing sort of like logical sort of brains um, over more sort of
Social.
holistic, like social brains. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And yeah, I do feel like, like the thing is like I, in school, like I did really well. Like, most people tell me like I have a really high IQ. I've never done an official test, but on unofficial tests, like I score several standards of deviation above the mean and stuff. And I know that like I do have I do potentially have, a lot of things that I can offer and contribute to the world. But it's just like there are just, certain circumstances like like the depression and anxiety and low confidence and, sensory issues associated with things and stuff that just seem to sort of hold me back from actually, being able to fully use that. And I don't want to sit here and just be like, "Oh, it's not me. I blame the world," because those are like problems that I have. The whole, the mental health comorbidities that come with it, right? Um, but yeah, I do think, you know, if autistic people are given the right conditions, right amount of, respect and patience and whatnot, I do feel like we can contribute hugely. And, this hypothesis of separate planet of autistics and a separate planet of neurotypicals, I'm not sure how helpful that hypothesis is because just simply because the fact that, it would never actually happen. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and, I feel like, a society can be a good mixture of those different traits, those different neurotypes potentially.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah.
I mean, I'm just
And
the reason why I'm thinking about this hypothetical is because basically the world where only autistic people would live in it would be completely accommodating to autistic needs, right? So there would be a bigger control on sensory
mm,
on sensory
yeah, yeah,
right. So basically they would be able to flourish in that environment and to show their real full potential. And we would also
mm,
see to what extent they
mm,
actually have comorbidities that actually come from autism and are not
mm,
directly, just like for example with I don't know, it's I don't know, people are probably going to be upset about the comparison, but I mean there is a difference between somebody who's uh, homosexual in the 60s 70s. He lives in a
mm,
society where society really despises him for the most part,
mm,
and where he live compared to someone who's homosexual in London in 2024 in a really
yeah,
hip quarter of town, right? So there is a
yeah,
big. So what I'm wondering is, do you feel like a lot of the issues that autistic people have is just coming from being very different than the rest of society, and not from a brain deficit that is basically, because there is brain deficits that really actually
mm,
make your life miserable without
mm,
society contributing to it, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, I think one way to think about this is sort of like in certain video games, right? Like different like characters you can choose have different stats, right? And it's in terms of like like more comparing neurotypical people to autistic people, right? Like the sort of things like the emotional statistic in neurotypical people is higher, but then in autistic people, often like the logical statistic or just some splinter skill. Like a lot of autistic people are just very good at like playing a certain musical instrument and stuff. Like that's higher, but their stats in other places are lower, right? And yeah, I do understand exactly what you're trying to say. That it's like different pros and cons, right? There are pros and cons, regardless of what neurotype you are, so to speak. And yeah, I think it's in terms of like to say that it's like fundamentally a disability, right? Like as opposed to someone who has a severe physical disability or like a severe intellectual disability, and it's not a matter of the environment for them, right? Like necessarily, of course, having certain environments can help more than others, but yeah, I do think that but yeah, it is mostly to do with environment, because like if you look back to like I mean like even like 50 years ago and before, like autism wasn't really at least like high functioning autism wasn't really something that was a thing. And is that just because some genetic mutation happened and it spread everywhere? No, I do think a lot of that is due to cultural factors, right? Like now we are currently, especially in the West, we are in a place where, things like social sensitivity is really,
Sorry,
yeah,
I have to ask, what was not a thing? High functioning autism. So autism was a thing, but there were no high functioning autists. Is that what you're saying?
well, no, no, there were, but it was much less prevalent and it was less of a
Hmm.
problem, it seems.
Yeah,
You
I
know,
heard that too,
it was
but
like,
I feel like that was because mostly autistic. I mean, diagnoses for
mm,
autism was mostly language related.
yeah, right, like non-verbal sort of
Yeah.
thing.
So I don't know. I could be
Yeah.
wrong about that, but I
I
feel
I
like.
guess when I yeah, I guess when I say it, I'm sort of like just comparing myself to like,
Hmm.
some nerdy guy from like, from growing up in the '70s or whatever,
Hmm.
right? Maybe didn't have any friends or a girlfriend in high school or whatever,
Hmm.
and he didn't socialize that much, but he got good grades. And and he got really good grades and he got to go to uni or whatever. And after that, as a result, like he got a good job, and it was just because he was demonstrably really smart. That was the most important thing. And girls after he was being recognized as being smart and having loads of money and high social status, like they didn't care. about his awkwardness quite as much and stuff, and inability to read the room or whatever, because he had that high status and stuff, and it feels like sort of like things like technical skills and stuff were much, you know, like at least relative to sort of like social skills, used to be more important. It used to be sort of like, if you went to uni and you did this course and, you passed it and you got good grades, like you're guaranteed to sort of like have success after that. But now that doesn't seem to be the case. Like,
Yeah,
I talk to people all the time like
it
that.
it seems like currently it's more important than ever to also be socially apt.
Yeah,
Um,
it's like the whole
and
networking thing and stuff, like,
yeah,
that kinda goes against people like me,
yeah,
indirectly at least.
yeah. Also
So
within the company, so where before engineers used to work like in a very
yeah,
isolated manner, now
yeah,
basically all of the teams are structured in a way where product and tech is very closely working together. Whereas
right, yeah,
before tech was like completely isolated from the rest of the company and was basically in there, yeah. And that's not
y
the case anymore. But I feel like that's because, I mean, that's the result of I think scientific research is showing that this is a more productive and better way to create products, and it's increasing
mm,
productivity, and it is creating better products because yeah, I mean, I fundamentally believe in the theory that the reason why human beings are so superior to all animals is that we have a very evolved way of communication and cooperation that is
mm,
not so this superior way of communicating and cooperating is basically the advantage that we have over every other animal. So I guess there I do see what you mean. I still I'm not quite sure how to unite these two things. I guess there was a criticism, right? You are criticizing this new, I mean that's what I hear from your videos. You are criticizing
mm.
this new way of working, right? That is putting more weight on social skills
Yeah,
beyond the fact that it's bad for you personally, right?
sure, because it's, like, about getting stuff done, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's about, and I mean, yeah, sure, like, I am biased in that sense because, yeah, like, if I contrast it with, like, if I, went to school and, like, I got C's and stuff and D's and whatever, and barely passed, but I had good social skills, then I'd be at an advantage right now, you know? Um, but, I guess, like, you know, that's a kind of a complicated question of, what is more productive, right? This whole sort of, social based kind of way of like, working and producing things as opposed to just like more emphasis on like, logic and technical skills and whatever. Like, yeah, I mean, I don't know for sure. I don't know if anyone knows for sure what's best. All I know is what works best for me.
Mm-hmm.
And, at the moment when I see, that like the West has largely adopted that way of thinking, and it does seem to be going downhill at the moment.
But I feel like,
So I don't know.
I mean, this way of I mean, I work in tech, and
Yeah.
basically this way of agile development, software development is to be. I feel like I could be wrong, obviously, but I feel like it's the superior way of producing at least software, right? Because you're directly in contact. You're very agile in the way you're creating
Mm,
things, and you directly get the feedback of, because at the end of the day, I
mm,
mean, you are sitting isolated, you are creating something, and you are a nerd in order
mm.
to create that. But at the end of the day, you're creating it for social creatures that are using it, right? So and they have to
Yeah.
like it, right? And so this agile
Right.
way
Well,
of
I
b-
think. I think maybe you're making a bit of a false equivalence there though, because
Mm-hmm.
yeah, sure, if you're making some typing some code or whatever and you give it to someone else to review, like, that's not necessarily out of the realms of what an autistic person could do or whatever, but when I'm comparing it to like, like other jobs, like other like common jobs that people have, that are much more like face-to-face interaction. Like, yeah, sure, like you can type a bit of code and send it to someone and then they send it back. But that's not a hugely like that doesn't have as huge a social component as most other sort of things. Do you understand what I mean?
Kind of, but I feel like it still does because, for example, for me, I work in a team. I have a team under me that is like other programmers, and not all of them
Mm,
have the social skills that to communicate what we're doing, to explain what we're doing to other stakeholders in the company, for example, right?
mm,
Or also when I'm a
right.
freelancer, right? When you have a customer that you
Mm,
have to explain to, the customer
yeah.
explains their needs to you, what they want from
Hmm.
you, and then you basically
Yeah.
have to create a technical product that is reflective of these needs. And in order for, and of course, there is a lot of misunderstandings and miscommunication that can happen there. So the more the more exchange there is between the person that is consuming and that is designing the product and the person that is actually creating the product, the better, right? That the faster mistakes can be changed and the better and cheaper product you get at the end. So that's the idea basically behind it. And I agree, not everyone, I mean, there is people in software development who are maybe not diagnosed autistics, but who are definitely not socially that fit, they just they
Mm,
don't like to talk to people. They rather just code the whole day and just be with it, and that's totally fine. I think that's really important that we also have spaces uh for that, because they're really good at what they're doing, right? But
yeah.
overall, the idea of product and development in every area of STEM or tech is I think a good thing. I think it increases productivity and
Mm,
it reduces cost, especially because you're able to dissolve faults very fast.